Hi, this is iPhone XR. It's Apple's new mainstream iPhone which starts at $750. Excuse me, are you already typing? Are you already leaving a comment about display resolution and pricing about OLED versus LCD? Can you just stop? We can do it later. We all have a great time down there. For now, just hang out a second and ask yourself, how much do you really care about the display on iPhone? I know a lot of people have questions about the 10R size. That's weird. Not huge, not small, 6.1 inches, and we will go to that. But I am telling you, the deciding factor about the 10S and 10R is the screen. If you could put a dollar on how much you care about the screen, would that dollar amount be $250? Because that is exactly how much you need to care in order to buy iPhone of the 10R. Let me explain and then you can all do your thing. Okay, so last month Apple launched the iPhone XS and XS Max, which are Apple's new flagship phones. They have A12 processors, H2H OLED display, Apple's latest camera system that does smart HDR. It's essentially everything Apple can fit into a phone. And the iPhone XR is basically the iPhone XS with a slightly worse display. That's it. That's the whole thing. It's got the same A12 Bionic processor, the same main camera with smart HDR, the same iOS 12, but instead of H2H OLED, there's a 6.1-inch liquid retina display. And the display is fine. It's lower resolution and pixel density than OLED's new flagship phones like the XS and Galaxy line. But if you are upgrading from a previous LCD phones, it's going to look really familiar. I don't think it's a little worse than previous LCD iPhones. When you look at it off axis, it shifts a tiny pink and the brightness drops quickly. It means it can sometimes look a little shimmery, but honestly, you have to be a huge display nerd to really notice that. What you will definitely notice is that little bezel around the entire display and the Apple's notch. The notch is the same deal as the iPhone X and XS. It houses a Face ID system in the front camera system, but the thicker bezel is there because Apple had to fit the backlight for the LCD panel somewhere. Don't get me wrong, the bezel looks gigantic and especially silly next to the XS, but the backlight's engineering is actually really clever. You don't see a lot of LCD phones with perfectly round corners and no chins out there, and Apple did a bunch of crazy Apple stuff there. One of the major differences between LCD and OLED screen is how they produce light. OLED pixels are their own light source and you can turn them on and off individually. You don't do that with an LCD because there's just one backlight of the entire display. So you can round off LCD corners by shifting off the pixels. With it super tough to get it perfect because the backlight will still shine through. Check out the 10R. We will literally put in under a microscope so you can really see this. So how some of this pixel looks smaller? That's because Apple tweened little apertures from the pixels around the corners to mask some of the light coming through on the top of anti-aliasing the curving software. It looks great. Isn't any of this necessary? But it's super cool and it's super Apple. All of the screen re-engineering means that Apple had to took out 3D touch. Instead, there is something called the haptic touch, long press with the haptic feedback. No, there is only two places that I ever used 3D touch on my iPhones and I did really miss it here. I used to scroll around the text field which works with long press on the spacebar and turning on the camera and flash from the lock screen, which you can do by just holding on these buttons. Apple has the best haptic feedback in the industry and all of it sort of feel very convincing. I don't miss previewing links in Twitter and Safari, but Apple tells me haptic touch with comes to more and more places in the iOS over time. Hopefully that gets added back in. It comes in 5 colors. I love how black unit review look like. I got to see the other colors and they are really nice. I like the blue and the coral the best, but the Project Red is striking. I know people are excited about the yellow. Just keep in mind that while the screen on the 10R is made up of same glass, On the other hand, 10 has that Apple's as is the most durable avatar. 10R is back, not the same class. It's the class housed in the last year's iPhone 10 and the backup my iPhone 10 shuttered. Even though I keep it in the keys all the time, so be careful about that too. The point supports wireless charging with the same redesigned coil for faster charging, and the 10s and it has IP67 water resistant, which is better versed in the IP68 of the 10s, but it's fine for the occasional splash. We have also got Apple's new wide stereo speakers, which is much louder than before, but not quite as loud as the 10 Max. Around the back there is the single wide angle camera, which is basically the same as iPhone 10s wide angle. This is our third shot at reviewing Apple's new smart HDR camera system. After the 10s review and the Pixel 3 review, we wanted to do something a little bit different. So we took some different pictures, look a lot like we did see every day on Instagram using the Pixel 3 and the iPhone 10R. And while I think that Apple's smart HDR still isn't quite good as the Pixel 3, I think I finally understand what Apple's is trying to do. Pixel 3 is more dramatic, but the iPhone 10R is more even. But Apple's smart HDR doesn't always get it right. The photo of Maria against bright background would be challenging for any camera, and you can see how the iPhone 10R brought down the highlights in the background, lifted the shadows and Maria's face and warm everything up, while the Pixel exposed Maria's correctly and let the background highlights blow out. It's the same thing with selfies. The iPhone brought up the shadows so much that it made the black jacket turn grey. It almost looked like we shoot this photo with a film splash and there is a face lash detail in Maria's face. Again, I really prefer the contrasty look of the Pixel 3 photo. There was a bunch of controversy around the front camera on the iPhone 10s, which people claim was something out and beautifully skinned. But Apple tells that all the bug and that will fix in iOS 12.1. Will improve selfies on the 10R and 10s by picking a sharper base frame instead of a blurry long exposure. I don't have iOS 12.1 yet, but we still have to see that it works out. Okay, here's a really hard one. Low light without weird lighting in a bar. I think almost people would prefer the iPhone here, but doesn't actually look like reality. The iPhone found Maria's face, exposed it correctly with the right skin tone, and then flattered all the highlights and lifted all the shadows to make scenes look even more better. Again, it almost looked like we brought lights to the bar and lit the photo. The Pixel 3 on the other hand does a much better job of capturing the strange red light in the room, even if the photo is a lot darker and wider. Now, do you want a photo then a more accurate to reality or more pleasant to look at? I cannot tell you. It's really subjective decision. The 10Rs only has a single lens in the back, and I am just going to come out and say that it doesn't miss having the second lens firm in the 10s at all. I never really took zoomed photos in 10s and the 10R single lens portrait mode. It's actually really good. In face, I prefer the 10R portrait mode to the 10s because shooting using the brighter wide angle lens means it works better in the low light and takes more interesting photos. Check out our photo we took on the riverfront while I was able to capture the sign in the background. It just wasn't possible to get the shoot in portrait mode on the 10s or on the other Pixel 3, which crops it the portrait mode. In a low light, the 10s is obviously better than the 10s. The photo is a bar, looks like a grainy dark mess using the 10s telephoto compared to the 10R, which did a halfway responsible job. 10R portrait mode also has Apple's new fall of a blur, which looks more than a real bokeh than sort of a bad cut or blur you see from the Pixel 3. Now, I did really use portrait mode on any of these cameras. I don't think any of looks terrific or perfectly cut out, but the 10R portrait mode is kind of a most flexible and useful of the bunch. After 3 rounds of testing Apple Smart HDR, I am beginning to understand that it could and it can't do. It can definitely take photos and camera has ever really taken before, but it still crushes details on produce artificial looking images way more often than I would like. While the Pixel 3 just produces winners constantly. As always, I couldn't possibly tell you what I like better. But I know that I prefer the consistency and naturalness of the Pixel 3 over the 10R, and there is always just the first stage of computational photography. I would expect the competition between the Apple and Google to be fierce over here. But right now I would prefer the Pixel 3. The iPhone 10R has the same video capture as the iPhone 10s. It can shoot 4K 60. When you shoot in 24, it adds frames to create greater dynamic range, and it records stereo audio. If you want record video on your phone, you should go an iPhone. In terms of performance, 10R was always essentially identical to the 10s, as I used it day, and it even had basically the same benchmark number in some quick test. It has slightly less RAM than the 10s. It's 3 gigs instead of 4. It's pushing half an megapixel, and honestly, I think the RAM specs matter way less on iOS than it does on Android phones. Apple's chips are so far ahead of industry that it clears the A12 Bionic has tons of and room to spare. The 10R gonna feel fast for the least a few years. The 10R always has a larger battery than the 10 and the 10s. It can run for 13 hours and maybe everyday use of borrowing an email and Slacks and apps. That's about 6 hours of screen, and it's slightly more than the 10s and even more than the 8 Plus from the last year. The only major performance difference between the 10R and 10 is LTE. The 10s supports the faster gigabyte LTE speeds and the 10R does not. I don't live in a city with gigabyte, but maybe you. But it doesn't something to be aware of. So there's a lot of iPhone 6s out in the world, more than you think. I think a lot of people are going to upgrade to the 10R from the 6s. So I have to mention that there is a no headphone jack, which I would think will promote another round of annoyance. And there are also basically no accessories for the 10R yet. Apple doesn't even have its own 10R cases ready, which is little strange, and there have been official battery cases for any iPhone, which is a shame. There is also no third-party headphone adapters, thereof a bunch of stuffs missing. So if you are upgrading right now, it's worth nothing in the accessory ecosystem, a little thin right now, but I would expect them to get a lot bigger, be fast. And one thing is clear about iPhone 10R is that Apple is going to sell tons of this. There are huge upgrades from the iPhone 6, 7, 8 generation with the Apple's latest processor and camera's big screen and updated design and competitive opening price of $750. And honestly, when we first started making the video, we felt like the big question would what is 10R is missing compared to the 10s. That I have used this thing for a while, it flipped in my mind. The real question for the iPhone buyers is whether spending $250 more than 10R, because the 10R offers almost everything you would want in 2018 phone, minus an OLED display. I would pay the next money in a heartbeat because I am really picky about screen. But I think most people aren't think most people can. Find me better spend $250 than infinite black levels and 60% wider dynamic range in photos. For these people, iPhone 10R is a no-brainer. Real question is whether you think the screen on the iPhone 10s is worth $250. So now you can leave the comment. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. We talked a lot about the iPhone 10s and the Pixel 3 in this review. So if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Thank you guys for watching the video.